computer. Okay. We're ready. This is session 4 of our poetry workshop. Students, today we have Nikolai Garcia and Ken Scott. Nikolai is going to be going first, so before I bring up his poems, let's give Nikolai a chance to say a little introductory, whatever he wants to say. Go ahead, Nikolai.
Hello, thanks for having me on. My name is Nikolai Garcia. Grew up in South Central Los Angeles. Been living in Compton for the last 15 years. I'm assistant editor for Dryland, a literary journal based in or born in South Central Los Angeles. And I'm glad to be joining you guys today.
Hey, perfect timing. There's your poem.
Okay. All right. Yes. So I'm going to be reading a couple of poems of place. This first one is called DTLA. I am the heart, my alleys filled with rats and love letters written with aerosol paint. My mornings are anxiety. I let the homeless mingle with elites, and at 5 p.m. I vomit onto freeways. I dress up my history for visitors, putting on costumes for tourists, speaking a little Spanish, serving them sushi. I keep a library in my chest. I read every book and know the score to every basketball and hockey game. My nights are a tip jar full of dirty dollars, a greasy slice of pizza, laying next to a drunk cell phone in an Uber waiting for another passenger. I wear a crown of smog. I valet a million cars and speak every language. I am the heart.
Yeah. Wow. You know, this poem, every line's got something to say in an interesting way, too. Like, I don't know if anybody caught on right away, but if you look at the start of the poem and the end of the poem, see something interesting there? Yes, that's right. This poem went circular from the beginning to the end. And everything in between is so interesting. You're good at juxtaposing things, you know that? That's
Thank you. Yeah.
What do you call that? What do you call it? Juxtaposing things? Like, they're not quite oxymorons. I wouldn't be that technical, but it's like, I'll give you some examples here. My alley's filled with rats and love letters written with aerosol paint. So that's unexpected, right? Love letters written with aerosol paint. Unexpected yet totally understandable.
Yeah. Or just the word rats right next to love, you know?
Yeah, that's a great juxtapositioning. It is. And then in the second stanza, I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to say, but the elites, that sounds like something. Is it something? The elites?
Just kind of like talking about how, because I'm talking about downtown LA, where you see a lot of juxtapositions, like businessmen and also homelessness, and high rises and people sleeping on the streets,
Tall towers and next to them little tents.
Yeah.
Okay, I guessed right. And then, what a line. I vomit onto freeways. Wow. Yeah.
That's how traffic feels.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken, if you want to say something.
That is how traffic congestion feels. It feels like some evil demigod just vomited onto a freeway and we mortals have to bear it.
Yeah.
Or it's the result of meeting those demigods. Sometimes I feel like vomiting on the freeway, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to be helpful to my students in case the student chooses this poem for their essay. My history, I want to go over every line in this poem. It's so terrible that I have to want to do that. This is such a good poem. I dress up my history for visitors, putting on costumes for tourists, speaking a little Spanish, serving them sushi. Now that was interesting. That's an interesting juxtaposition there. The multiculturalism of LA.
Yeah,
Right? Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That is multiculturalism.
Yeah. And there's no time to rest because the next line is spectacular. I keep a library in my chest. One of my favorite lines in the entire poem.
And know the score to every basketball and hockey game.
Yeah, and the best thing he did there was he has enjambment. It says, every book, I read every book and know the score. Okay, so for a second there, you're thinking one thing, and the next line, brings you the other thing. So
And there are so many sports arenas going up in LA these days.
Yeah.
You notice the construction.
Big business.
Yeah.
And I mean, that stanza is alluding to, the Central Library, right in the center.
Downtown.
And also, the Staples Center where they have Lakers, Clippers, and the Kings games.
Yep, exactly.
And that's big business, really big.
Very big business.
Yeah. So I learned from the 5th stanza that you're an Uber driver, I think.
I actually
Or
don't even drive.
So
okay, so you know an Uber driver, yeah.
Well, I've known many since I don't drive. I have to. And I spend a lot of time, or I used to spend a lot of time hanging out downtown. And so that 5th stanza is pretty much like a picture of what my, weekend nights would be like,
You're hanging
bar
out.
hopping,
Yeah. And then
taking lifts.
I'm doing it. I'm discussing every stanza. The 6th stanza, wow. It's just strongest of them all, it really is. Talk about saving the best for last. I wear a crown of smog. Wow.
That's what happens when you vomit onto freeways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good summation. We got to steamroll ahead to the next poem because we do have time concerns. But that's a great poem. Let's go to the next one.
It was
awesome. This is Felix the cat is the mayor of Los Angeles. I spend most days atop a nopal devouring a snake. Sometimes I substitute the snake for a pupusa, and sometimes with Korean barbecue. Sometimes I substitute the nopal for a train. My view extends and I can see the Queen Mary sleeping. Sometimes I substitute the train for a bus. Some days the bus is lonely except for empty beer bottles and the smell of poetry. But some days the bus is packed and I'm squeezed in with 5 people in the back row where we all fall asleep and all have the same dream of owning a Prius. Sometimes I'm on the 110, the Harbor Freeway, with no harbor in sight. Just a million cars running a gauntlet of giant palm trees while Felix the cat looks on. Sometimes Florence doesn't intersect with Normandy, and I can hear flowers laughing in the park. Sometimes the smog is so thick you can't see 3 inches in front of you, and the smog hides police murders and handshakes between businessmen and councilmen. Sometimes a storm comes in to substitute the smog for a rainbow. Just kidding, it never rains here.
Oh, well, this poem expands the scope of the first one. The first one was downtown. This one is the whole Southland.
This is LA, man. This is the beating heart of LA, pretty much. This is LA. Yeah. By the way, though, might want to elaborate on what a nopal is.
Nopal is how would I explain it? I mean, if you ever see the Mexican flag,
The Mexican flag.
the image there is of an eagle on top of a
devouring a serpent.
Something you find in the desert, a succulent, and you see them around LA a lot, especially Mexican-American households have them growing, and you can actually eat them. They're edible.
But that's what the eagle is on top of.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's green and thorny, very thorny, like cactus. It's like
Ah,
a
okay.
cactus is would be my way of describing it.
Okay. Okay.
But just when you think it's not real, you go to the next line. Sometimes I substitute the snake for pupusa.
Hmm.
And sometimes with Korean barbecue, there's a multicultural LA again.
Yeah.
Oh. So Nepal is kind of like a cactus.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And so yeah, I'm detecting a pattern here of the substitutions. And so that's very useful for my students, I think, for them to see that. Sometimes I substitute the nopal for a train.
Hmm.
That makes me think of the blue line to the Queen Mary. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes I substitute the train for a bus. Oh, we all know the joy of buses. Yeah. The
Mhm.
special bus smells. Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's poetry. And the 110 freeway, I've thought that all my life. I go, why is it called the Harbor Freeway? You have to go all the way to the very end. I guess that's why.
Yeah. To find out. Yeah.
No? And, you know, coming from the beginning, though.
Mhm.
The million cars, the gauntlet of giant palm trees while Felix the cat looks on from Felix Chevrolet.
Mayor of LA.
Yeah. And to me, that's just one of my earliest memories since I was a child, just sitting in the back seat and you see that, and
Yeah, the giant Felix.
yeah, the giant Felix.
You don't forget stuff like that. That's so true.
Wasn't it true that the Aztec settlers were told in a vision that when they saw an eagle devouring a serpent, that was where they were to build their civilization?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've heard that. Yeah,
That's how Mexico City came to be.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Right. No little history. Then you got a line that's actually quite beautiful. I can hear flowers laughing in the park.
Hmm.
Wow. And the rest is pretty clear, I'd say. And that wonderfully witty ending. Really, rain, not happening.
I
Not yet.
wish.
Rainbow.
All right, well, okay, those are two great portraits of our city. What is in store in the third poem? Oh, yeah.
Okay. This is Wanda Coleman's Roar. I don't smoke weed. I smoke palm trees. I rise in the clouds like the 110, 105 interchange. I take back airspace from a LAPD chopper, examining freeways, concrete ribbons anchoring our smog and beaches to the West Coast. Each night, I dream about Wanda Coleman. She tells me one day I'll be as big as the watchtowers. She says, point your finger in any direction. Eventually, you'll hit a freeway. Her laugh, a roar. I marvel at how Manchester Avenue creeps into Firestone Boulevard. I promise myself, when the freeways begin to crumble and the city drifts into the Pacific, I will stand watch. When the final palm tree goes up in flames, Wanda Coleman's roar will be the last thing I want to hear.
Woo, 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 woo.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, for those who don't know, Wanda Coleman, she's famous for being one of my very first guest poets over 30 years ago.
Awesome.
No, she did that, but she's not famous for it. She's really one of the two most legendary poets in Los Angeles, along with Charles Bukowski. Same publisher, too.
Yeah.
All right, what can I add to this poem? What can I add? Just your skills are showing through all the way through. There was an enjambment there. It was at the end of the fourth stanza. She tells me one day I'll be
As big as the watchtower.
I like that thought. And then as big as the watchtower. So you're getting double meaning simply by enjamming. And that's a great poetic trick. It really is.
I think it's more a play on politics rather than the size, because the watchtowers had a lot of political significance.
Mhm.
Yeah, cultural significance to the area, absolutely. And even it's kind of fun in the rest of that stanza, it's saying, she says, point your finger in any direction eventually. So you're left hanging again. So that has a time element. It's like you don't just get the stanza break, which makes a little psychic distance, but the word itself, eventually, kind of one of those words that trails off. So that's pretty masterful too. Along with creeps, I mean, this got some strong verbs here. I remember being told strong nouns, strong verbs, right? In your poetry. And Wanda Coleman, it just reminds me of Wanda's poem about her car.
Hmm.
That's a legendary poem.
I see LA's eventual death in this poem too. That LA will die, and on that day, Wanda Coleman's roar will be the last thing you want to hear.
Amen to that. LA, the apocalyptic town. We haven't had our apocalypse yet, but someday.
Yeah, because you said you promised yourself when the freeways begin to crumble and the city drifts into the Pacific, you will stand watch when the final palm tree goes up in flames. Wanda Coleman's roar will be the last thing you want to hear.
It's interesting that palm trees are not indigenous to this area.
Yeah.
They were imported.
I'm definitely gonna have to write a poem about that one day.
That's deep.
They're such a symbol.
Yeah, that's something I learned new. That's something new.
All right.
But
well,
you know,
let's see how we're doing for time. That took about 20 minutes, so that's almost perfect. Normally I ask 2 questions, but I think I'm going to save the 2 questions for the end and ask both of you at the same time, just to be sure Ken gets his 20 minutes in too, because I just spent a lot of time on these poems because I just had to. Yeah, delightful. Okay, so I got to find Ken's poems now. Did you want to say something, Ken, while I'm looking for your poems?
I've been writing poetry for quite some time. I've been doing it since the early to mid 1980s when I was in college. I went into career with the city of Los Angeles. I work as a systems analyst. Right now, currently working at Hyperion Water Reclamation Plant, supporting the Environmental Monitoring Division and the Laboratory Information Management System. But in my spare time, I write poetry. I perform poetry. There was a time when I was composing music and I was singing in the choir at my church, which is the Holman Choir, Holman United Methodist Church. But right now that's on hold because of the pandemic. But I still do, like I said, a lot of poetry.
I didn't know that about you, Ken. You're a singer.
Yeah. I sing the bass. I sing in the bass section of the choir. We do a lot of classical, jazz selections, but mostly liturgical for the Methodist Church. Been doing it since 2007, but I've also been singing most of my life. Started when I was relatively young. Did various choirs and solos in junior high and high school.
Is it safe to say that was nurtured?
Yeah, my family is actually a family of artists. My mom had a singing voice, but she mostly did Broadway work and dancing when she was alive and when she was young. My father continued his singing career until he passed away, but he was doing a lot of work as a tenor. He eventually retired, but not retired, but he continued his work on stage, but he went on to become a professor at Morgan I believe it's Morgan State University. I forgot what the exact name was, but it's out in Baltimore, Maryland. There's a lot going on right now. I'll have to check on that later, but that's
Wow,
what
you
Dad was doing.
saying things that are so interesting. I want to respond to them. Like, you're not a native of Los Angeles then, right? You're from.
Well, my mom and dad had me in Manhattan Boroughs, New York. And then my mom, after she divorced my dad, took my brother and I, my younger brother and I, and moved us out to Los Angeles in, I believe, 1972, 1973.
Wow, that's a big move.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. I was knee high to a grasshopper when she did it, but it's been LA ever since.
All right, can we hear the voice of Ken Scott?
Okay,
The
this
poetic.
the first piece I'm going to do is called I Wish. I wish I had never known desire. Unfortunately, I have. And the desires of my body and mind cloud my vision every day. I sometimes find myself outraged, frustrated, longing to tear the flesh and blood off of my soul so that I can see. But suicide is also wrong, even worse than the covetousness which has taken away so many years of my natural life. And every time I try to praise God, I fall short, mired by the very things in my heart which displease him. And every time I think I've got it right, I find myself dumbfounded by the multitude of errors God has revealed to me. I feel empty now, as if my life has come to a roadblock too high, too wide, too thick, and too deep to cross. There are times now when I lose all sense of time and destination. Whatever I want may very well be forbidden. Desires which may very well result in more loss and more suffering and more languishing. I don't want to die, and yet I wonder what I'm living for. How do I please God when what I desire displeases him? How do you discipline yourself against yourself without dying, without hating yourself, without regretting your life? I have no answer. I have no poetry now. I am tired. I am weary. I hate myself. I hate my life. I wish I could be the perfect Christian. I wish I had never known desire. I wish, I wish, I wish.
This reminds me of another poem of yours. That's why I was starting to scroll down.
The reason that I did this one was
Yeah.
I was struggling with some things as a believer in the faith. This was when I was really, really evangelical in a sense. I was like really hard in the church, but at the same time, I had other desires. I had things going on, you know.
Yeah, earthly desires. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
you even have poetic devices in here that would be considered religious. For example, having God in capital letters.
Yes.
And him, and then some capitalization of words like vision and see.
Yes.
Those become
Spiritual aspects.
spiritual words. Yeah.
Spiritual aspects of what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I strive for these things, you know, it's like the carnal desires interfere, but a little more on that. It's something I've had to learn to move past. I'm realizing that desire is human, that desire is natural, that desire is acceptable to embrace. You need to understand that you're a flesh and blood human being as well as a spiritual one, and there's nothing unhealthy or unwholesome about physical desire. You just have to learn how to embrace it without hurting other people. And that's the important message I want to leave with the audience. That desire, that's you. That's part of you. But the only thing that you need to be aware of and be, you know, cautious of is not hurting other people.
Good lesson for us all. Okay.
Yeah.
Poem number 2.
Okay. This one is my esoteric traffic piece. I count cars. I count cars to send my soul to sleep. It is night, and I long to forget. Forget that I am but one in a sea of many, traffic jam seeking purpose in this ancient sea called confusion. I smell the pain through voids of time, pain carried to my soul by way of sackcloth and ashes at night, ancient stones and demons walking in the midst of night skies, walking, tripping, jumping down to the pit, walking. I speak of horses galloping off of cliffs and into ancient seas of forgetfulness and ancient romances long dead. Counting cars, I remember the pain of lashing out at strangers, rude drivers. I have mistaken for night demons of mass confusion. Yet I cannot reverse the words I have sown. They are the stones I have thrown seeking peace. I will wear sackcloth and ashes, forever regretting the car windows my ancient stones have broken. Time cannot heal these, our collective wounds. And my heart shall set last horses free to dwell in endless fields of night. They shall carry my dreams where I could not. I shall lament my loss in vapors and mists that shall transcend the smog of these days. I am in a hopeless waking stupor, counting this myriad of cars on my way to sleep, my eyes and mind transfixed upon the fluxing, flowing steering wheel, forever one with asphalt roads that move under the hooves of my perpetual nightfall memories. My anger is outside of my depth of self, stoning cars like midnight gargoyles and drive-by murders in secret. And for one infinitesimal moment, I recognize the ugliness of its pleasure. Tearing through ancient tribes with blood and sacrifices, explosive hollow tips dripping with the cold blood of midnight. I must mourn with sackcloth and ashes while my horses run through seas of night. I must forget the tiny droplet falling towards the longest of midnight oceans. I must forget for one infinitesimal moment that I am the solitary droplet and run with my last horses, forever separate from the demon who counts cars.
Woo.
Traffic.
Very satisfying poetic meal, sir. To use the wrong metaphor. Where do I begin? Where do I begin? So many good lines. One of my first favorites is the first line. I count cars to send my soul to sleep.
Yeah.
It's a great beginner. And then you have that line that, there are no stanzas here per se, but it's like about 5 lines down, 6 lines down in this ancient sea called confusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really sets things up.
It's been with LA for a while.
And then there's that element of the sackcloth and ashes. What exactly is that?
That is religious, Judeo-Christian in origin. Started with the Jewish faith, but normally when you sinned and you repented of your sin, especially in the Jewish faith, you mourned with sackcloth and ashes. It was basically a humbling and a basing of yourself. The sackcloth and the ashes indicated that you were in such a lowly condition that you were not fit to wear any good clothing or be clean, but that you put on this ugly garment of sackcloth and you had ashes on you to indicate from ashes and dust you were made, and to the ashes and dust you will return, that you are utterly nothing, and that you utterly mourn your sin and repent of it before God, who has every right to punish you for your sin, but you pray for God's mercy. And sackcloth and ashes indicates that plea for mercy before God. It means you have humbled yourself to where you are truly sorry for the evil that you did.
I was going to paraphrase you, but I don't need to anymore. You explained it so well. Humbling yourself before God, that was going to be my paraphrase.
There it is. Yeah.
All right. And then it takes another interesting turn. You go a couple lines down there. I speak of horses galloping off of cliffs. How do the horses get in here? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
It's like a setting free. Horses run, they run fast. I saw them as free spirits. I saw them as leaving the mundane, jumping off of the cliff of the land on which you stand, which is secure, which is set, which is a foundation. And so when you're jumping off a cliff, you're no longer supported by that foundation. You are, in fact, in a free fall, in a sense. There's nothing beneath your feet. But where they go, the ancient seas of forgetfulness, an ancient romance is long dead, they're headed towards another realm.
So the modern version is the car. Horsepower.
Yes.
Did I get it? All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that makes this very clear. Yeah.
Right. But it's also, like I said, it's a matter of being set free, because when you're in that traffic congestion, you're not free. You can't go anywhere. You're stuck between cars. Yeah, yeah.
And the middle of the poem has kind of an interlude. It says, I shall lament my loss in vapors and mists that shall transcend the smog of these days. That's quite a line.
Yeah. Again, I was feeling sorry for a lot of the emotions that I felt in traffic congestion, because at one point I was so angry at these other drivers. I mean, it even mentions in the poem doing harm. Yet at the same time, when I realized that these are just people trying to get from point A to point B, it caused me to really repent and really feel sorry for the evil thoughts that I had against them. That they're just other people. They're just trying to get through, you know?
Yeah,
That,
very good point. That reminds me of the legendary words of George Carlin, which I cannot repeat here, about drivers.
yeah.
But you can always YouTube it. Yeah. And it all seems to flow with each other for the rest of the poem there. I mean, just it really just blends.
It was a lot of emotional imagery, and my main focus was the imagery, and the imagery presenting itself. And even though sometimes it seemed disjunct, the images communicated with each other to form the whole meaning. Um, and basically, it's just the experience of dealing with LA traffic and everything that it drudges up and everything that you feel about it.
I can mention just one more thing and we got to move on to the next
Yes.
poem, because
Yes.
I just cannot not mention this, because toward the end of the poem, you say, I must forget the tiny droplet, that I am the solitary droplet, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that humbling, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Okay, I
just,
got that right
yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
That
understand Ken Scott's poetry now. That's really a fantastic poem. Well, what are we in for the last poem? Let's see.
Okay.
Oh, a short poem. Surprise.
One dream, short poem. This complicated world is filled to overflowing with struggles for wealth and power and fame, while so many people live from paycheck to paycheck, paying off debts on houses and cars and college tuitions and lifestyles. And yet, with one dream, one flight, it all vanishes away. I look to the stars, journey the heavens, and all the raging world ceases to be. I will not neglect the birds that need to fly.
This is different. This one, it takes you from the death of reality, really, the dead life, right? The paycheck to paycheck life that so many of us live, and the burdens. And then what happens? Do you want to explain?
It's from bondage to freedom.
Mm-hmm.
It speaks of the use of the mind, the soul, the inner being to discover flight, to take wing and to truly be free.
And you mean that metaphorically in the last couplet there, that is the release.
And to realize that the world of struggle, the world of hardship, the world of torment, the world of greed, and the lusts for power in that world, that it was all an illusion from the beginning when the mind spreads its wings and takes flight. It's
Yeah,
really,
that reminds me. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Ken.
it's really an esoteric piece. It speaks to a lot of philosophy that I had studied for a while, going all the way back to the 7 Hermetic principles of ancient Egypt, where the first Hermetic principle is that the all is mind, the universe is mental, and therefore everything that exists is a thought, is a being. It has its own spirit, it has its own mind, it is a mental construct, and it is alive. It is not dead. Every last thing, even what we call inanimate, is alive. And we need to stop using the word inanimate, because everything has life. I mean, there's a scripture in the Bible where Jesus entered Jerusalem and the leaders were upset that people were praising Jesus with loud hosannas. And Jesus rebuked the leaders and said, if those people hold their peace, the stones would start crying out. And I don't think that Jesus was speaking metaphorically. I think that he was speaking literally, that the living beings that were the stones would start shouting Hosanna in place of the people. And then there's another phrase in the Bible where Jesus was looking for figs from a fig tree and couldn't find any because the fig tree decided to be disobedient and not bear figs when it was supposed to in due season. So Jesus cursed the fig tree and it died. And so then the disciples, bewildered, they said, wait a minute, you cursed the fig tree and it died? How could it do that? Jesus said, well, if you had faith like a mustard seed, not only would you be able to do what I did to this fig tree, you could tell that mountain over there to get up and go into the sea, and it will do what you say. Jesus was talking about these inanimate objects, these things that we take as being inanimate, but he spoke of them as though they were living things. And if we can understand that everything around us has life, has a mind, has essence of life, then we've made 90 to 99% of the mystical journey. And
And the
understanding,
world would be a lot better place, that's for sure.
understanding the reality behind the reality.
All right, as you can see, I've reached the magic 5, the last 5 minutes of our recording time. And so now I've got to ask the famous 2 questions, the student question and the teacher question.
Okie doke.
All right, so the number 1 question I hear from students, what they want to know, and both of you can answer this. How did you become a poet?
I'll let Nikolai go first.
Let me just give you the quick version. It's a long story, but really, I was watching old episodes of Roseanne, and there was an episode where one of the daughters had to write a poem, and she read it aloud in class, and it really touched her mother. And I really liked the poem too, and I was like, I don't know, 13 or something, and I was like, hey, I can do that, you know. And I like reading and writing, so it's kind of where it started.
Cool beginning. Ken.
I started writing poetry as well as other creative writing projects in high school in the early 1980s. It would be from 1980 to 1983. That was when I attended high school. And the literary professors there, who were extremely focused on creative writing, the creative aspect of writing, nurtured the spark of being creative as a writer. It wasn't just, putting sentences together and getting the grammar correct. It was being inspired to write. And so they nurtured that ability for me to dig in myself and bring up whatever emotions I was feeling. And they challenged me to write, to express myself, and to be comfortable with expressing myself. And that inspired me to write and write. And even though I wrote on and off from that point in the early 1980s onward, I mean, it was a rather tumultuous time, given Reagan upending everything, and then Bush Sr. following in his footsteps. Y'all remember, right? Some of y'all remember. I'm sure the younger people don't, but hey.
That's a whole nother episode if we wanted to do that. But
yeah, exactly. But during that time, I kept writing.
Final question that each of you give a minute answer. This is like a presidential debate, but
okay.
This is why I propose this whole thing to the program, to have people like Nikolai and Ken Scott, a chance for you to hear many voices, because every voice has something to say. And so my teacher question would be this to the both of you, and that is, what advice would you give a young writer?
To me, right now I've been having a lot of hard time writing, and I have ideas and whatnot. I think I'm kind of like just missing the drive. It's been a long time since I've written a poem, and so my advice would be to just write. Just find a time and be disciplined about it, and just write. I'm saying this to your students, but I'm saying this right now to myself, because I know what I have to do to get back in the groove. Is just find the time to just write, even if it's nonsense, even if it's nothing you ever plan to publish or anything. Just write.
Good advice.
I couldn't agree more. I would add, be comfortable with your writing. Be comfortable with your pain as well as your joy. Be comfortable with your sorrow as well as your curiosity. Be comfortable with your outrage as well as your deep reflection. Be comfortable with the totality of what's inside of you when you write. And don't be afraid of what comes out on the paper. And yes, even if you do have fear, write it. Don't hold it back. Let it out. Let it out. And most of all, be comfortable with your writing, because your words are you. And you are your words.
And there's only one you. Very good. Thank you, Nikolai and Ken. We're out of time. I have to end this recording. Here goes.